I'm Dr. Jen Boyle. I direct the Digital Culture and Design Program and also the QEP initiative where we're sitting, which is the Digital Commons for Humanities and Arts. This is meant to be a very intimate setting, so we don't have a lot of space, but we've got a lot of people in here already, and people will be coming and going and sort of occupying the space to both listen to the session and offer questions. So we're hosting the event, but the event has been arranged by Dr. Tripti Pillay and her wonderful program AGEP, which is Arts and Humanities Global Experience. And with that, I'm going to allow Dr. Pillay to introduce our first speaker of the morning.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. And hello, MenottiG. We are meeting again. So what I'll do is I'll set up just a brief introduction, and the format is as follows: that MenottiG or Gabriel will talk for about a half hour, and then we'll have time for Q&A, and we'll have him sign off a few minutes before 11 so that we can set up for the next speaker, right? So Gabriel MenottiG works as an independent curator and lecturer at the Federal University of Espírito Santo, Brazil. He is the author and co-editor of numerous publications dealing with image technologies and institutional critique. He is also one of the contributors of the Besides the Screen Research Network. Currently, MenottiG is a Fulbright Visiting Fellow at the Center for 21st Century Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he's working on the uses of volumetric imaging for cultural heritage. MenottiG's talk today is titled 3D Replication Technologies, Digital Artifacts for the Radical Mediation of History. It's all you now, MenottiG. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Tripti. Thanks, Jen, for the event. Thanks to everyone in Coastal Carolina. It's really a shame that I can't be there. I'm currently in San Francisco for all the talks, but I'm really happy to be able to participate in some way. And also thank you for setting up the camera like this. Normally when we do Skype talks, people use the computer webcam and then you can't see anyone, so you can see people are getting what you're talking, you can see reactions or anything. I hope that in this way we can have more of a dialogue.
Absolutely.
I'll also try and show some sites as references for the work, so that you can see something besides my big face on the screen. I'm currently, as Tripti said, working as a visiting scholar at UWM, at the Center for 21st Century Studies. And I'm trying to wrap up some research and some projects that I've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years using 3D replication, which is the general term that I've been using for practices of scanning, printing, or using virtual reality in order to show volumetric objects, so things. How do you, and in particular, when I'm talking about replication, this notion of replica is important for me because I'm thinking about high fidelity copies that refer to the real. So they can kind of be mistaken for the actual object, or they can be used as a very persuasive reference and a very informative reference about the artifact itself. And my original interest in the subject came from research in image technologies and the materiality of the image. And when I first started seeing people using 3D scanning with mobile applications, for example, in recent years, I was kind of impressed by how, once again, people were investing a lot of faith in the image, just as people did regarding to photography some time ago. The indexical character of the image, of the 3D image in that case, and the way it looked like the actual object gave it an interesting power and an interesting status as the real or the true. And so this was my first interest in this subject, but as I started dwelling in the field of of replication of 3D scanning in particular, I realized that it's something that's being used much more nowadays, kind of as a default, by cultural institutions that are working with heritage and art. So the research nowadays has these two tackles on these two notions of representation, how the system works in terms of representing the real, and also how or what's the notion of culture being represented in these collections, or sometimes re-represented. And I'll try to show some sites now to give you all an idea of what I'm talking about in case you have never seen. If there's any problem, I mean, if the screen doesn't change or anything, please let me know, sure, and I'll try to set everything. But it should be easy. Just a second, and there you go. Are you seeing me or are you seeing my browser?
We are going to see your browser.
Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing your browser.
Let's hang on 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this is, just as an example, this is a web page in a site called Sketchfab. Sketchfab is a kind of YouTube or Instagram. It's an open platform for sharing 3D models, 3D animations. So it's used by 3D animators. It's used by people in this industry in order to publish their work. And it happens that the British Museum has a page here. It's an official British Museum page.
Right.
And they publish their own artifacts that they scan in this page. So if you go here, you can, for example, see and manipulate the Rosetta Stone.
Yep.
Can you hear the sound as well?
A little bit. Yes, a little bit.
Yes.
Okay. I turned it off so it's easier for us, but
yeah,
the thing is that with Sketchfab you can not only publish the models, but you can also program some interactions, some navigations, some annotations. You can also overlay a narration about the object, as you saw, as you heard. And anyway, you have the model here. It's navigable. You can look around. You can explore it. And I have to say that as a teacher, as a professor working in Brazil, this kind of reference is super good for me. Because my students, I live in a small town with not many cultural institutions, and of course, when we're talking about art history, for example, or the ancient civilizations, we always have to refer to this sort of artifacts. And normally what we have are pictures of them, and like JPEGs, and we can't really get close to the object, or you can't really give the impression that an object is an object. Yeah. It's three-dimensional. It's something to which you have a spatial relation. It's not only a visual relation. It's not only like three-dimensional image. I would say that we never only have a visual relation to image. It's always spatial. But in the case of a three-dimensional object, even more. And with these sort of resources, you can come closer to the object, and you can see that, yeah, there are 3 different alphabets here. That's what the Rosetta Stone is, not just a slab of black rock with some scribbling. It's like actual kind of a page. And not only the British Museum, but some other institutions, cultural institutions, already have published some of their models online. Some use these sort of commercial platforms, just like Sketchfab. Here have an annotation. Let me just click to see if you can see it. So an annotation about it. But also some others use their own proprietary platforms. The Smithsonian here in the US, they also have a platform called Smithsonian X3D, where they published a lot of the artifacts in their collection. Not only about cultural artifacts, but also history of species, skeletons, archaeological evidence, and so on. So this kind of, and actually it's interesting to make some difference, because the models that the institutions publish online normally are lower quality, lower resolution, lower polygon count, than a very hi-fi model, but some of them have their own private archive of scanned 3D objects, which they use for documentation, for conservation sometimes as a reference, or which they use for research. In case someone wants to, like browse their collection, their catalog, it's better to have these sort of assets, of proxies, than just having pictures or a list of the objects. And but this is just some reference about how more or less everything started. One of the main subjects around which 3D scanning has been developed since the beginning was for the conservation of cultural heritage. This is an inaugural project called Digital Michelangelo project, where they scanned the Michelangelo in Firenze, in Florence, the laboratory of computer vision in Stanford. But what I wanted to show really is these other kinds of initiatives. This one in particular is another website called MenottiG. It's also a platform for sharing assets. In that case, it's for sharing models for 3D printing. And the main difference between Sketchfab and MenottiG is that the models here, normally they are just already prepared for 3D printing. So you just load them on 3D printing software and print them. And normally they don't need to have textures. So as you can see, most of them are kind of super white, because it's like the mesh with a standard material, with a standard texture. A lot of the quality in the model that we see here, even though they are low poly, come from the quality of the texture. When you the texture is the JPEG file, a PNG, an image file that you just put over the mesh, and then you can kind of see, yeah, it's like covering it and making it feel real. And the thing with the Scan the World is that this is basically a kind of collection, a community within MenottiG, made by everyone, anyone. If you want to contribute to it, you are allowed. You just post your model, and it's as you can see by the name, it's a collection about objects in the real world that people scan on their own and they share here. And as you can see, you have some very important cultural artifacts available here, such as the Victor Samothrace, the V, Thinker, and so on and so forth. And this kind of crowdsourced scanning happens normally because, well, first of all, because the techniques used for scanning, they are very approachable. They're kind of cheap, reasonably cheap. The technique that I use and that most people use to do these scans do not require any special equipment. You don't have to have or use a Kinect, for example. Kinect is a sort of video game controller from Microsoft, which can get volumetric images. You don't need to use, or you don't even know how to use this kind of equipment. You only use a normal camera, and even your phone camera can be a device for this kind of scanner. The technique's called photogrammetry, which comes from measuring with photography. And after you take a number of pictures of the object, you just throw them in a software, of course, following certain rules, and the software will recreate the mesh for you. So, and you can find free and open source software that do it, but one of the standards of the industry, so to say, which is the Agisoft PhotoScan, it's used by museums, for example, nowadays. It has, I think, a pretty reasonable license for education, which is around $200, I think. So you can get very high quality work with that. But as I said, there's also free and open source alternatives that are kind of tricky, but you can get them working. And for me, it's interesting what people do with these technologies. For example, this is a VR game/experience called the VR Museum of Fine Art. It's published, it's free, It's on Steam, which is a platform. It's one of the standard platforms for distributing VR content nowadays. And it's basically what it says. It's a museum that you navigate using your touch controllers and your headset, and you can see some art there, some classic art. And a lot of the sculptures that are here, they have been acquired, they have been taken from these collections, from these public 3D model collections. And just pause here, because this is perhaps the most interesting thing about the VR experience. The idea that you can appreciate the models in a one-for-one scale. As I said, you learn a lot when you have the 3D representation instead of just the flat picture. But when you have the 3D representation in its actual scale, your relation to the object is completely different. So once again, speaking as an art history teacher, it's super important to have this kind of experience for the students so that they can understand that their work is not only visual, but it's also spatial, and our relation to it is a bodily relation. It's not only a scopic relation. So, and another interesting thing about this project for me is that it was made by just some guy with some free software, basically a free license of Unity, and he got the images from the internet, everything from the internet, and he created this sort of platform for people to experience fine art using VR for free. And I really like this sort of initiative. And what I'm actually missing from this whole scene right now, the whole VR cultural heritage scene, particularly from this sort of folk archive that people are making themselves, is more diversity. Because as you see, this is a VR Museum of Fine Art, and the guy, they got artifacts that are already recognized as fine art, as valuable objects, as universal cultural heritage. And if you go looking into the official museum's collections, of course they are reproducing what they already have. So they are reinforcing or reproducing their own hierarchy of cultural values, which finds what we would expect from the institution. But what I find kind of disappointing is that the public, everyone, we try to stick to the same notion of what is valuable. When you go looking into the communities and we go looking into the kind of personal initiatives, the personal projects that people are doing about 3D scanning, they are kind of reinforcing the same hierarchy and the same artifacts again and again. So, as you can see, it's basically a lot of classic art, except for this exception, which is funny word. Anyway, so what I'm very interested in right now, especially when it comes to the economy of representation concerning 3D scanning, are the initiatives that try to breach this bubble of cultural heritage or cultural hierarchy. And I've been trying, and I've been finding some projects with a para-institutional character that are kind of doing that. This one I really like because it shows me some things that I have never expected to see. It's called Archivo Nacional del Patrimonio 3D, and it's a national archive of 3D heritage from Chile. And it's an initiative of one artist called Fernando Fuglino, I think. And he took the initiative to just scan every statue in Uruguay, which is kind of crazy. I mean, it's an ongoing project, but at the same time, it seems manageable because Uruguay is a small country with very few cities with statues, with public monuments. So I think that's a great initiative in the way that it inscribes the Uruguayan cultural heritage in the sort of global shared archive of the internet. It seems to be a very strategic intervention by him in the way it makes these representations accessible, these artifacts in some way accessible to us. Of course, we lose a lot when you're just seeing the 3D model. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but at the same time, we also are able to get more information about the objects and about the culture itself as a collection of objects. And you can see that, for example, here, just 3 examples, how the statues in Uruguay, they are not only neoclassical statues paying homage to the colonizer, but also they are paying homage to the natives in the country. So it's an ongoing project. It looks more institutional than it is, but I think that this kind of institutional performance is also an interesting strategy to be used in these situations. Another project which is an European but very interesting for me because of the repercussions is this one called Lincoln 3D Scans. Lincoln is actually a city in the UK. I don't know if you know it. I didn't before I got to know this project. And they have a museum there called The Collection, which I didn't know either. But the collection, they commissioned a guy called Oliver Larry, who's a web artist and net artist. He works very much with clip arts, with found images, and they commissioned them to work with their collection. And his proposal was to just scan everything and put the models online. And this was pretty early in this recent trend of 3D scanning. I think 2013 or 2014. Can check it later, but it was pretty early. And the things that they not only published the collection here, the objects here, which is great because suddenly the collection of a museum that I could never even know can be discovered by me. Mm-hmm. But given the scenes, the field in which Oliver works, he also promoted this as a source for remixes. Of course, you can also use any of these objects for remixing. They're like there for you to download and use them in your own projects. But in that case, there was this cultural context promoted by the artist himself for people to reuse the work. And they have a kind of gallery here with some examples of what people did. So mostly you have this sort of net art, post-internet appropriations of the models, many GIFs, many images, video chat with Aphrodite. They used the model here to do just like what we're doing now. Yeah. And as you can see, some of them, they kind of stray away from the archival representation. They are more playful, much more playful. Animations, well, some sort of 3D printing. Here are some 3D printed versions of the artifacts, which, once again, it's a great way to give other people access to your collection. I've been trying to do something similar with the collections that we have in the galleries and museums in my hometown, but it's taking a while. One other thing that I've done, on the other hand, was a sort of more experimental and critical project concerning this space in São Paulo called Vila Itororó, which is actually, it was a village, and most of the pictures that you see of it are of this palace, which is part of it, but it's not the only part of it. It was a village created by a son of Portuguese called Francisco de Castro. He was an engineer, and he wanted to just have this place so that he could live in the palace, and he could rent the other houses. You can see perhaps some of them here, right? Could rent the other houses and live off the rent. But he died super young, and the place was kind of abandoned. He went to auction, and this was the 1930s in Brazil. And a hospital connected to the Catholic Church bought it, and also, well, went on renting their houses. But since they were from another city, not from São Paulo, they kind of lost control over it. and people just started occupying the places and subdividing them in order to make more families fit. So it became a kind of shanty town in downtown São Paulo. And as you can see here, you have some aspects of the original architecture, like the columns, the vases here, some ornaments. But you also have these architectural adaptations, these walls in bare brick, which indicate that people just did some sort of do-it-yourself reforms and adapted the palace to become a sort of a flat. Just like actually they do in the UK, where you have these old houses that are subdivided and become small flats. That's what they did with the village. And at some point, the hospital, which owned the place, just gave up on collecting rents. So in a way, the people that lived there became the owners. And the thing is that this space, it's on a very, the area became super, not really rich, but valued. And the architecture itself, it's kind of indicative of a special period in São Paulo. So the civil government wanted to, the city government wanted to transform it in a cultural center, which meant kicking everyone out and like sending them wherever in São Paulo. So there was some resistance around it, and in the end, the people, the tenants, they were kicked out, but they got a kind of victory because they were relocated to someplace near the downtown São Paulo. They still live in the area. They are not expelled to faraway suburbs, and they are able to buy the apartments they are living in right now with sort of help from the government. And on the other hand, the space itself started to be managed by an NGO who tried to create a sort of different cultural center. So they decided to open it as a sort of construction site already as a cultural center, and think of what would be a cultural center that is also construction site. So trying to work conceptually through the idea of culture as something that's still being constructed. It's not something from the past that we are trying to conserve, but it's something that is ever changing and of which we participate. So they did this, a lot of projects, and they tried to involve the neighboring area in the construction of what would be this future cultural center, since the village itself is currently being reformed, but also already make it into a cultural center. And one of the partners they got was the Goethe Institute, who organized a series of artist residencies there. And I participated in one of these residencies. And the project that I tried to explore these uses of 3D replication as a way to deal with cultural heritage, especially disputed cultural heritage. So these are some pictures documenting the process. Of course, when I got there, the things that were available in the space itself for me to work were the ornaments that belonged to the palace. So when we look at it, it seems like, yeah, this is cultural artifacts. This is history. Wow. So I did some scannings of it. Here are some printed models. They also have a free and open Fab Lab there, which anyone can use. So we printed some of these models. This is actually the space I was working in. But my idea was to make a sort of archive that included these official artifacts that are still part of the village, that still belong to this institution, but also artifacts of the former tenants that are, in my opinion, as representative of the history of the place. So at the moment, what I have is a sort of online collection that includes these more, let's say, institutional or official records, such as this is a caryatid that was in the palace. You can navigate and download it. And of course, the architects that were responsible for the renovation of the place, they were amazed by how easy it was to do a 3D scanning. But for me, it was interesting to bring these artifacts together with some of the artifacts of the old tenants that were there once and left. Because, once again, there's two sides to the story. And when you consider a collection that only has these elements, you are kind of erasing another side of it. So I went to their houses and I scanned some of the objects that they felt were representative of the village. Some things that they had when they lived there and they were able to take with them when they changed houses. So lots of small stuff, lots of toys. This is a toy, one of the first that the daughter of one of them had. And the thing about these scans is that since I was, well, in their houses, the lighting wasn't that good. The space was very cramped, so I could not have like a proper distance for capturing the objects. They got very in a very bad situation. As you can see, the mesh, the process of scanning was not perfect at all. So there's a lot of holes and artifacts in the objects. And normally when we have these problems during a 3D scanning, we just go through some post-processing, some modeling, and we cover for these glitches, these gaps. But I felt it was interesting to leave them as a way to inscribe in the form the fact that these objects have a different character from the other ones. And of course, it kind of goes without saying when you look of the kind of objects they are. This, for example, is a camcorder, which is like, well, this is not historical artifact, but in a way it is. It was one of the camcorders used by an activist, an artist activist involved in the process of resistance against the eviction. So it recorded a lot of the movies of these, a lot of political reunions with representatives of the government. And yeah, so in a way, it goes without saying that it has a different quality from the other elements, but the idea of getting also this inscribed in the form of the object itself, so that if the object is extracted from this collection and used for another thing, it still carries these sort of scars of the process. Which I know it's kind of more poetic than it should be. I mean, yeah.
We like poetry.
Sorry, it's just that my buzzer rang here. Anyway, and currently I'm trying to work with this material in a sort of VR documentary. I wish I could show you some things, perhaps I will later, but sadly this computer doesn't run the software I'm using because it's a terrible computer. But I can show you one of the things that I did during the residency. Where is I think I lost it. So just a second. During the residency, I did not have access to virtual reality equipment, and I did not have time to prepare anything. Just for the record, this is the place, this is the building where they are living now, the former residence. It's close to the area, but small. It has no common area for the children to play. They complain about this a lot. But so what I did was to prepare some volumetric video, some 360 videos, so that people could see it using these cheap cardboard goggles. Mm-hmm. Here's the video. You're it's like kind of in space. It's very low quality because I could not render the video in the proper resolution. It took me 2.5 days to render this video using my computer, and I had to show it in a timely manner to the participants. And here you see the object coming in your direction, but when it gets too close, you realize that it's not an object at all. It has all these gaps, and it's actually made of small points. It's a point cloud. I didn't talk about it, but the point cloud is like an intermediary. And then you can look around and kind of explore it. goes super quick and then goodbye. It's kind of fading away. Another object is coming. And while the objects are passing through you, like in this sort of empty space, you can hear the voice of their owners telling you the story. Can you hear it, by the way?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, so probably has to do with the transmission of data through Skype, but there is a narration, which I got from interviews with them, and they are telling the story of these objects. So it was a kind of prototype so that they could understand the possibilities of these technologies for representing the object and also for representing the representation itself, in a way. For me, it was interesting to bring this narration. We've seen in the first site how the narration, the audio guide, is sometimes used by the institution as a way to explain and guide you through the collection. And in that case, there is also a sort of audio guide, but it's like the voice of the people trying to explain and try to describe their own stories in these objects and in the story of the institution.
We can hear something.
But I muted. Can you hear now? No. Okay. So anyway, I can send you the link afterwards if you want to see it.
Please do.
All of these will be collected, as we mentioned at the beginning, as an archival resource, both our conversations here, your recordings, and there'll be a place for any sort of accompanying material, so we can integrate these with it.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of an overview of the current work I'm doing and my current concerns and current experiments or attempts to understand these technology and do something relevant with it, or something. Yeah, I'm not sure if any of this is right. Sometimes it feels strange, sometimes it feels refined, but anyway, well, thanks so much for hearing it. I'm here for questions, criticisms, and comments, and I'd love to hear from you as well, what you have, any opinions you have about it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Menotti. So, any questions you might have, comments? We have 10, 12 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, Hope.
I was just curious, since you've been doing the Fulbright and all this research, what kind of, like, I guess, inspired it, or how did you get to where you're at, to where you're, like, studying all this stuff and you're, like, so, like, invested in it? Like, what do you think was, like, that one point when you were like, I want to research this and, like, this is what I want to do?
Sorry, I need
So
we'll go ahead and repeat the question. We were able to pick it up on the video, but sometimes it's hard for you to hear. So the question was from a student here of in the process of your training and your activities, at what point did you get the idea, or did you think this is something that I want to do, that this would be an interesting intervention to make?
I'm always curious about. I have a very strange background. I'm actually a journalist, but I hate journalism for some reasons, and I started doing a pirate film society in my undergrads, and this kind of got me involved with audiovisual media technologies, but not from the point of view of a producer or a critic, but rather from the point of view of the technician, the guy that's, this is how projection works. I have to get the projection working. So in a way, I'm always very concerned about how the image or how the representation feels real, but in fact there's a lot of work or a lot of process going on in order to make it feel real. And I went on to study like movie theaters and how they are not neutral spaces, they are actually historical architectural constructions. There's nothing natural about watching a movie in the dark. I mean, this relation, and of course, this got me interested in the relationship between image and space. And 3D images are a new way of representing space that kind of gets us confused about what is space and what is the image. And finally, can we experience spatiality using media technology? And I feel that yes and no. I mean, we can experience some kind of spatiality, but there is once again another spatiality that's being kind of suppressed or erased or taken away from us. So, I mean, virtual reality is not virtual reality, so to say. It's not reality. But for this project specifically, for my interest in 3D scanning, started with an app. I'm curious about stuff, and there is. I think I still have this app here in my phone. Here it is. It's called Scene. It's a free app. Once again, it's shaped like a sort of Instagram an Instagram of things, but in that case, it's an Instagram of three-dimensional pictures. As you can see, I think I downloaded it around 2012 or 2013. I mean, there's a kind of a... Yeah, that's terrible, but anyway, I can send you the link for this as well. So it's a cheap way of doing 3D scannings with your phone. They were not really 3D scannings, but these were images with some sort of volumetric quality. And then, but of course, for me, the most interesting things at that time, as I said, are the glitches, how the image does not represent the real. They are actually strange meshes, especially when you're trying to capture transparent materials, reflexive materials. So if I had to indicate one specific inspiration for the research in 3D scanning, that's to blame, the app.
Thank you. Any other questions for MenottiG?
I have a question.
Okay.
So is it your sort of hope that with the 3D replications of these artifacts that have been sort of marginalized by the cultural hierarchy, that you can sort of, or we could flood these digital spaces with them and then sort of overturn that cultural hierarchy of like high art and high value culture?
So
I understood some of the elements, but I didn't get the question.
okay, so the question is asked by Shante, who is a student and also she's majoring in digital cultures and design. And the question she's asking is, do you think there is a possibility that if this democratic space of is taken over and we start 3D printing and flooding the space with objects that invert the cultural hierarchy or the value of art, what is the possibility of democratizing the value system? Is that a fair recalculation? Is it possible? And what do you imagine would be the consequences of doing that?
Actually, I don't think it's possible. I'm kind of skeptical about it, but not because I'm skeptical about this technology in itself, but I'm skeptical about like this sort of revolutionary possibility or from the technology. I don't know. I think it's an ongoing resistance. It's about resisting the hierarchization, resisting the norms or some kind of norms, resisting the status quo. I mean, there is a status quo, and I think it's hard to just get rid of it completely, like heaven on earth or revolution, communism, finally. I think it's important to have this utopian agenda in the horizon, but perhaps because, I've seen a lot of struggle in my life, I think that this is just a way of resisting, of dissenting. There is this guy called Hacking Bay. It's a kind of dodgy guy. Later he was, but he has an interesting take on revolutions, and he says that the uprising is more politically powerful than the revolution, because if you follow the history of the 20th century, of the great revolutions after a revolution, you always get, once again, the system, the status quo is reformed. I mean, so I'm kind of cynical about these kind of utopian promises. I like to have them there, but I'd rather think about political action as ongoing resistance. And there's always a way to dissent and put things into question.
It's a wonderful articulation,
Yeah, that's really
because
good.
I was thinking earlier, we tend to, one of the kind of dichotomies that you're pointing to, right, revolution, counter-revolution, dystopia, utopia, is this sense that we're dealing primarily with representation in some sort of clean way. And I think one of the things that you pointed to at the end of your talk was how, when you were talking about the labor of working in these low-tech environments, that you're really drawing attention to the body in a different way too, not even representationally, but labor, the long-term labor that goes into these kinds of things, that really sort of is its own form of resistance, right? Drawing attention to these facts that these are not clouds, they're not abstractions, they're bodily environments. I thought that was a really wonderful kind of intervention as well, that kind of offers another kind of plurality around this idea of resistance.
Okay. Thanks. Well, thanks for the questions. Sorry, it's always weird to
Yeah, I know.
engage with
Yeah.
people through the camera, but yeah.
Any questions from? I have a question, but it's, I don't want to push you towards utopianism, Menotti, but what is the future? So you're working on this right now. You want to, I mean, in some ways, what you are doing is, I will say, hopeful, right? I mean, the work that you're doing in some ways incorporates an otherwise, I don't want to say helpless, but otherwise, I will say helpless. So let us say, so you're in empowering an otherwise helpless situation, an otherwise helpless environment, and most importantly, an otherwise helpless peoples, right, to kind of write themselves into a history that is eager to change, eager to gentrify, eager to, homogenize their culture. So how do you plan in future to make these dissent acts, or continuing the project? How do you think your next project will look?
I see. Actually, it's kind of hard. In the case of the Vila Itororó project, I don't know how politically effective it is. And I don't know how it really represents the people that are there. It's an attempt. It's a very personal attempt. It's for me to represent their objects.
Yeah.
But I really don't know. I mean, I can't speak for them at all. And I'm not sure if it's any helpful for them in any way. I think it's more helpful or it's more important for people working with 3D scanning and archives right now to see that there are these other ways of relating to images. There are these other things that we should be considering, these other communities. And so, yeah, in a way, in their sense, I feel kind of bad about the project, in a way. And in general, what I find more empowering when it comes to working with technology is just doing workshops and showing to people how these things are approachable, how these things are easy to do, so they can do it in themselves and for whatever they want. Like, as I said, and this might be an invitation for all of you, 3D scanning is super easy. You just need a phone and I'm not saying that this is enough for you to like create a complete perfect replica or anything, but it's a way of like perhaps putting on the internet or sharing with the people that you like, or that you don't like, things that are important to you. Like, it's another tool for us to kind of open space in the history, capital H, to the struggles and the lives of individual people. I'm kind of very naively humanistic in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's important to show that society has individuals. Society is not an individual. It's not a collection of individuals. It's not a Thatcherist thing. It's that there is the diversity of society is important. Like, the society is not homogeneous, and we have to acknowledge the struggles and the lives of everyone. So I think it's, when it comes to the political power of these technologies, I think it comes to showing them to people and and letting people know that they are technologists, they are not the reality. So there is one side of know how to learn how to use this and use this for whatever you want, but also learn that media literacy, like learn that media is media, that someone might use this to trick you into believing things that are not good for you, for example. Perhaps I'm oversimplifying things, but I think these two practices that go along with making art or curating exhibitions, they are actually more politically relevant for social change in general. And it sounds super preachy, sorry.
No,
But
no.
another thing that I organized and might be relevant for all of you is this conference with the Besides the Screen Network.
Yes.
We've been organizing conferences in Brazil and London. They started in Goldsmiths College in 2010, and I know that there are some from Goldsmiths there. And yeah, we try to create a space in academia. It's also a space of resistance for multidisciplinary practices, for other forms of research. They are always free, which is weirdly rare in academic settings. And our next conference is in Porto and London. You can present papers, you can present artworks. And the deadline is tomorrow. So I'd just like to invite you all. Sorry.
Next year.
Yeah.
Next year.
But no, I mean, if you're already working with these topics, it's a conference about archiving and preservation and like unarchiving and unarchiving. So if you have anything there that you're already working with and you want to send it, please do.
We will. Well, there are some of us who are working on it, and maybe I shall persuade them to do so. Gabrielle, we should sign off, but may I say thank you very, very much. Please give Menotti a round of applause.
And it's just a very last note. I'll be sending out notifications for these, but through the Digital Culture and Design website and the QEP, this QEP project here, which is the Digital Commons, we will be making all these materials available. So if you have those additional sites and that the videos that you talked about that you'd like to accompany our conversation here today, please send those along, and we'll kind of curate them all together.
Yes, and I will email you tomorrow with any questions you might have that I can answer.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks to all of you for putting up with the Skype thing. I know that's kind of annoying, but I hope that it was a pleasure for me to share these thoughts with you, these questions, and I hope that we can continue the conversation in some way. I hope it can inspire you in some way. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, and I hope you have a nice event. I'm
Yes.
super sad to not be here.
Oh, no,
Happy
this is wonderful.
conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stand by.